What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Christian Labasco podcast. Today I've got Brian Meyerhofer on. Brian Meyerhofer has grown to 10,000 followers on Twitter. He's a fantastic writer and is a therapy shortcut. I'm super honored to have him on as a guest. How are you today, Brian?
Doing great, Christian. Thanks for having me on. I'm surprised that you pronounced my last name right.
Yeah, hoping I did it correct. I listened to a podcast with you and I
Ah, came
yeah,
prepared. I was gonna say, yeah, most folks have a hard time getting that one. No, you were dead on. You were dead on there.
that's awesome. For those who don't know your story, could you give a little background on how you got into the creator economy and your story before that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been coaching young men for the last 7-ish years, 7.5 years. I have a network. I live in Los Angeles. I have a network of therapists, psychiatrists, different sort of mental health programs, etc. Folks that I work with that have been a referral system for me for the last, better part of, half a decade, more than half a decade. And, just had so many folks around me telling me that I need to get online, telling me to start a podcast, to start writing, to start, getting this info and this knowledge out there that I could help more people with my ideas than with my time, one-on-one time, right? The pen's mightier than the sword. So
hmm I love that. Sort of similar with trying to get my dad online
yeah.
because it's pen mightier than the sword. Yeah. Did you who? So you started writing on Twitter from someone in your physical network, or did you find somebody online?
I found somebody online. I mean, just like a lot of these folks, Dan Coe is he's sort of the gateway drug to this world. So what happened was I discovered Dan Coe early last spring, and this last summer I went and walked the Camino del Santiago, which is an old pilgrimage, is an old Catholic pilgrimage in Europe. And so I spent 11 days. I walked about 260 miles up the coast of Portugal into Spain to the tomb of St. James in Santiago de Compostela. And it was right around the time when I had found Dan Coe. So I started listening to a lot of his YouTube while I was on this walk and started really strategizing my content rollout, what it was going to look like, what it was going to be like. And then I got back in town and I saw that Dan had put out a request. He was starting Cortex. And I remember the quest that said, we're in a position where we can be extremely picky with who we work with. And I sent in a writing sample, and so was one of the first folks that joined Cortex and ended up being one of the three folks that are in the VIP program there. So I've been working with Dan for the last year.
That's incredible. That's that is so cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that is quite an opportunity, and it looks like you've really taken and seized that opportunity.
Yeah, man. It's I think that there's a lot of a certain set of, idealism that gets sold in this game, in this creator game, but it's not outweighed by the very real opportunity. And I think that coming into it, there has to be a recognition of how long things are going to take, what the very real challenges are, married with the very real possibility and long-term viability as well. And if you can really hold both of those realities at the same time, you can't lose. And I still think that we're really early. But it ain't easy, that's for sure. It's in so many ways, and I'm curious, your experience is it can be really confronting, right? I look at entrepreneurship and even writing as a mirror for your relationship to yourself, right? So
Mm-hmm.
everything that you need to see and confront and face, these limiting beliefs, these deep insecurities, your hopes, dreams, fears, it's going to come to the surface. So
Yeah, something I've heard is that in when you're building a business or especially a one person business, the main bottleneck for the business's growth is yourself, your limiting beliefs, your blockages, things that like mindset. It seems like a lot of it, or most of it, if not all of it, is the internal game that reflects on how you approach the external game.
Yeah, absolutely. And such a big part of that too is just how you live your life, your lifestyle, right? What time are you getting up? How are you able to self-determine your own schedule and your own
Mm-hmm.
output? If there's no, I left my 9 to 5 in April. So I've been, full-time creator since April. And so I don't there's nobody telling me where and when to show up and what to look
Yeah.
like and how to dress and da 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 da. So it's all self-determined, which there's beauty in that, but again, it's very revealing.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely felt that as well as I've been homeschooled. It's the freedom, and then also sort of just like a sense of knowing that I have to use this time because I
Hmm.
have so much freedom.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. Yeah, so you've been homeschooled. Okay, I didn't realize that. And how long have
Yeah.
you been in
Just
the game, the creator game?
um I on Twitter just this year, but I found Danco last summer and I was interested. I don't know if you've heard of Iman Godzi. I
Yeah.
found him probably a couple years ago, but I've been homeschooled for the last 6 months, and that's when I started the creator game with writing on Twitter.
Ah,
Yeah,
interesting. Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
I don't know a whole lot about Iman Gadzi.
yeah. He's I like his older things better. I think now it's a little more of a production. It's less authentic, so I don't watch him as much.
That's kind of the impression that I got. That's
Yeah,
kind of the impression, Then I didn't get that impression with Dan, and that was, the one thing, and I said this to him that sort of struck me in working with him was his very real generosity.
yeah, yeah. I was in you went on Jack Moses podcast, and I joined Jack Moses cohort, and Danco came in for a call for Q&A, and I just got a sense of a lot of humility and that he was just down to earth kind of person.
Big time,
Yeah,
big time,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
And I think, on some, I guess I don't want to speak for him, but I think on some level, he's been a little surprised by the success, and some of which it is, market timing, and he's clearly very talented, etc. But there's that necessary dose of humility where it's like, this isn't all me, and I know, learning, it's interesting because I've just recently listened to his podcast with Justin Welsh, which I think was maybe 3-ish years ago, maybe even
Hmm.
longer. And it was very clear Dan's curiosity and what he was learning from Justin, which is now seen in his system, or now he's been teaching in Cortex and mental monetization and stuff like that. And it's just, I only mention this, and we can sort of move on. It's just, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? No
Hmm.
matter what field we're in, no matter what we're doing, we are all standing on the shoulders of those that came before us. And especially on the internet, everyone just borrows, quote, steals from everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of that, who do you think would be the people that you look up to the most today? It could be in the creator economy or just role models in life.
Yeah, I have a couple. I think I could give an answer on both. Two men that I admire greatly, and they both kind of sit on different ends of the spectrum, although they sort of have one thing in common, is Winston Churchill and C.S. Lewis. So Winston Churchill, I mean, saved the West. I went when I was in London. I went to the War Room, which was the
Mm.
bunker underground during World War II. And I mean, he was just an incredible man who was able to sort of bulldoze his way through seemingly endless obstacles that presented in front of him, and so many ups and downs, and a real bulldog, pit bull in those ways. And but he was also an incredible artist, an incredible painter. Just had an incredible mind, hell of an orator, incredible speaker.
Mm.
Um, Loved his wife. And then, C.S. Lewis as well, as a man who sort of embodies moral virtue and who didn't let his very real intellect, impede his spiritual development as well. And again, sort of, kind of two different types of men, two sort of different aspects of the spectrum there. But yeah, two men that I greatly admire. Um, there is a one of my favorite creators right now is Harry Beetle.
Mm,
I don't know if you know
yeah.
Harry, if you see
Yeah.
him on there.
Hmm.
He's incredible, man. Yeah, I love his newsletter, love reading his stuff. Taking a call with him. He was one of the first people that I actually reached out to and connected with when we just each had like a couple thousand followers. We were kind of both growing at the same pace. Really love what he's doing. I think he's super skilled. I mean, obviously Dan. I like Justin Scott a lot. Um, yeah, and I don't think I don't. I think my work ain't too bad either. So
That's really cool. It sounds like you're very interested in sort of the idea of the Renaissance man, someone that's well developed in multiple areas.
yeah, that's it for sure. That modern Renaissance man, and I don't claim to be one by any means, but right, I think it's important to have ideals that we strive towards, even if we never reach them, right? But and I think if people follow their inner experience and they follow their natural curiosity, you next thing you know, you will find yourself having dipped your toes in all these various different buckets, right? I mean, I think one of the big through lines for me is that my entire life I've just been a absolutely like voracious reader. I mean, I've slowed down a little bit recently as my personal philosophy has changed, but I used to read anywhere from like 50 to 70 books a year, a book every 5 to 7 days.
Wow.
And I grew up reading a whole lot, right? And I've always been obsessed with stories. And so I was a big reader. And then I started playing a lot of music. I lived overseas for a little bit. I was playing music down in Central America. And then in my early 20s, I became an actor and, was able to co-star opposite, A-list celebrities and did commercials for some of the biggest brands in the world. And I wrote, produced, and acted in my own film and did all sorts of stuff in that entertainment wheelhouse, which I'm still have, my fingers in a couple pies over there. And then I started getting way deeper into personal development and spirituality and went to school and got my master's and became a therapist. And I've always been an athlete as well too. I think the two big through lines for me have been my athletic expression and and my curiosity and my thirst for knowledge, which is really manifested previously in reading. Now it's much more manifesting in this kind of exploration of more trial and error throughout this entrepreneurial
Hmm.
process.
It's so interesting. It can definitely tell that your level of self reflection is very high.
Yeah, sometimes too hot.
um, what would you say were some of your life's biggest slash most pivotal moments or turning points?
Yeah, so the first one that really stands out, um, without getting into my childhood or growing up, but at 20 years old, I was in college. I was about to start my junior year. I was at Charleston, College of Charleston, South Carolina, wonderful town. And I decided to pull myself out of college. So I was still maintaining good grades. I was playing club tennis. I was having a lot of fun. But I recognized that my hedonistic behaviors, this hedonistic aspect of myself
Mm,
within partying, alcohol use, drug use, my relationship to women, etc. I had the
mm,
foresight to recognize that if I continued down that path, I wasn't going to get a result that was just in alignment with my values and the virtues that I strive for. So I made the decision on my own, which I don't know what it was in me that I guess I just identified it, right? The foresight, to pull myself out of college. And I decided to go back home for just a couple weeks, and I knew I wasn't going to stay home. That wasn't an option, right? My parents were supportive, but obviously there's a level of concern there. And I ended up at a wilderness therapy program in Hawaii. So I moved to the big island of Hawaii, and I lived and worked on a farm. I was there for about 4.5 months. It was an organic farm. We grew all sorts of stuff. And a big aspect of the work was the land and the relationship to the land,
Mm.
and cultivating that relationship daily through hard labor. But
Mm.
another big aspect of it was, again, it was a wilderness therapy program, was the therapeutics that were offered there too. So I did group therapy, individual therapy. I mean, it was clear that I had my emotional life was in need of some repair. I was 20 years old at the time. And I met this woman. Her name was Kelly, and she was my therapist down there. And her and I just formed an incredibly deep bond. And in no way could you have ever expected it, planned for it. I had no experience with therapy in the past. I think when I was like 12 or 13, I was, smoking a lot of weed and getting in trouble. So my parents sent me to a therapist for like one session, but I didn't care. And her ability to genuinely seek to understand me and my experience and where I was at. I was just blown away by her, really her therapeutic skills. I didn't realize what she was doing at the time, right? But she was just highly skilled as a therapist, and it changed everything for me. So I was there for about 5 months, and then through somebody that I met while I was in Hawaii, I was able to join a group of men that were down in Central America that were recording music with these Panamanian musicians. A group of Americans that were down there, and they were, they all spoke fluent Spanish, and they were volunteering and sort of building some houses, and playing music and recording this album with these Panamanian musicians. And and they needed an extra set of hands. I mean, they knew I played music because I played a lot of music when I was in Hawaii. And so I ended up going down there for another big chunk of time, and I focused on learning Spanish. And I was in this little mountain town called Boquete, which is right on the border of Costa Rica and Panama. And I played music, and I volunteered, and I learned Spanish. And yeah, so I call it my Eat, Pray, Love year, right? You know that book or that movie. But I went from being a college student, right, drinking, partying, womanizing, hanging out, doing what college kids do or what I thought was normal for college kids to do, to suddenly working on a farm in Hawaii with no phone, no internet, right? To suddenly living in this
Yeah.
tiny little mountain town, this little coffee town, this coffee farm on the border of Costa Rica and Panama. I mean, massive 180s in my life. And it was
Yeah.
really throughout that experience that my sense of spirituality and a real sense of identity beyond my just behaviors or external identity as an athlete or as a good student or whatever, really those seeds were planted at that time. And I'm reaping that harvest now, right? That's
Mm.
what's in my writing. That's what's in what people have been able to respond to online. It's really the seeds that were planted in my identity at that period.
Wow, that is such a unique and fascinating story. It's inspiring. I definitely resonate with this idea of having a relationship with the land or with the earth. And I think that can also often be a gateway for people to see their spiritual side when you're especially cultivating the land and seeing that when you put the work in, the land reaps fruit and things like that. I think it's
Yeah.
incredibly powerful.
You've had some experience with that, or you've seen it?
Um, I mean, I've always been obsessed with nature and things like that, watching nature documentaries,
Beautiful.
like out and outside and things like that. I've never been on a farm or anything like that, but that's something that I want to do someday is be
Beautiful.
in touch with nature like that. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Um, what would you say were some of those books that changed your whole viewpoint or were very important in your life?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a couple for sure. A couple at various stages of my life. So the first one, which I want to talk about, is a book called Iron John by Robert Bly. And Robert Bly was a mytho poetic figure. So he was a mythologist and he was a poet, and he was really popular in the 80s during the men's movement, the depth psychology men's movement, and sort of the lineage of Carl Jung and a lot of these post-Jungian thinkers.
Yeah.
So this book, Iron John, it breaks down a Gaelic myth of the wild man. And so this myth is a symbolic representation of the masculine development of the psyche, of the masculine psychology. And under the Jungian umbrella, it would be referred to as the process of male individuation. Jung referred to it as individuation. You individuate, self-actualize. It's whatever language you want to use. And basically the idea is that deep within, I mean, there's a lot of ideas, but deep with one of the fundamental aspects of the wild man is this recognition that deep within the male psyche, our ancestral psyche, our evolutionary psyche, lives this primal aspect of man, the wild man. And a key part of growth is simultaneously a reclamation of our inner wild man, which leads to this great empowerment, but also an integration of it and sort of an attachment, a detachment of its lower nature, right? Because within that primal aspect, there are these instincts that may not serve us. So anyway, so this myth explains the process of how to do that. He breaks down the symbolism behind the myth, and it's incredible. It's poetic though, so it may not be as accessible to some folks where something like, The Way of the Superior Man. I'm sure you're familiar. Love David Dida. I also love his mentee. So John Wineland is a man that probably not as many people are familiar with, but he worked and studied with David Dida for a long time. He's a little bit younger, big fan of him. And then really Joseph Campbell, Hero with 1,000 Faces. Joseph Campbell was another mythologist. And this is when I became more in love with story and myth and psychology, because I was so curious about why all these different cultures told the same story. They had no contact with each other. Why are the same characters showing up, the same themes, the same archetypes? Right? It's because story and myth is a symbolic representation of the soul's experience here. So yeah, those were some big ones for sure. David Dita's is definitely the most accessible. I mean, I've read just about every self-help book there is. I actually don't read self-help anymore, but yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Would you say you have a favorite author or favorite authors from your time of reading?
Yeah, well, the one thing too is that, which we don't have to get too into, is that I'm just a total fantasy nerd as well. I mean, I love fantasy books, so like Patrick Rothfuss's work, The Kingkiller Chronicles, is just incredible. When I read fantasy, I feel a little bit more magical. I have a little bit more hope in my life, right? There's something about the believing in that magic of fantasy. But I'm a huge fan of Robert Johnson. So he is another post-Jungian. So there's this whole movement of psychologists that came after Carl Jung, right? That sort of expanded on his process, his thoughts, and are able to communicate about his work in a way that's way more accessible, because he's dense, he's hard to get into. I like Robert Moore a lot as well. So he wrote a book which is really popular in the male spaces, which is called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Have you heard of it? So
no.
It's about the 4 main masculine archetypes that exist in the male psyche, right? So the king archetype is basically like the governing principle of man, right? Able to have the discernment to have dominion over his kingdom, his little kingdom, right? Both psychologically and even just in his life, if he's a relationship, wife, kids, whatever, right? The ability to rule in a healthy, generative way that's positive, right? The warrior archetype, being able to show up every day with consistency, discipline, this healthy amount of aggression, knowing how to harness it, etc. The lover archetype is being able to create, enjoy the more sensual aspects of life, not just
Yeah.
romance, but art, poetry, like leaning into that. And then the magician archetype, which is one of my favorites. And my nickname is Mo, and a lot of my good friends call me Mo the Magician. We don't have to get into that, but the magician archetype is the archetype of transmutation. He's the master of technology. He's the one who can create something out of nothing, right? Being able to transmute your own pain, your own inner struggles into wisdom, into growth, right? Being able to create and transmute online and you know in this attention economy and using the technology. He's the master of technology, right? So but each one of these archetypes also has its shadow quality and its shadow version as well. So for the warrior archetype, there's the sadist. And the sadist is somebody who obviously takes enjoyment and pleasure out of other people's pain.
Pain.
It's the shadow aspect of the warrior, right? The shadow of the king is the tyrant, right? He's a wicked ruler. He's the mad king in Game of Thrones. For the lover, it's the addicted lover, right? He's the Lothario, the Casanova, the womanizer, right? Or he gets too lost in his own emotions. He has no ability to detach from the finer things of life, right? Maybe he overeats or he overdrinks or oversmokes or overwomanizes, as I said. And then for the magician, it's the shadow archetype is the court jester, right? So for the court jester, his well-being is contingent on the applause of the audience, right? He performs for scraps. He's the court jester, right? Where the magician does his work behind closed doors. He doesn't need the applause. He doesn't need people to see his work. His well-being isn't contingent on that applause. And so we dance between these, right? So one day I'm the jester, the next day I'm the magician. One day I'm the addicted lover, the next I'm the actualized lover, right? So like it's a spectrum, and we have to identify, the tension in between and being able to hold them and dance with them at times and recognize that this process of growth, this process of the psyche and of our unconscious, it is not a linear process. And in fact, regression is a part of progression in so many ways.
Yeah, that was amazing. Something that stood out to me is that it seems that the magician does his work or his craft just for the sake of it. And that is usually a sign of almost everyone that has done anything great, is that it's just the sake of the craft. I think
That's beautiful.
there was a sculptor, maybe it was Michelangelo, and there was his apprentice or someone, and the apprentice went away for 3 months after seeing the sculpture and came back and said that Michelangelo had done nothing, or what he had done was a trifle, and that he said trifles make perfection, and perfection is not a trifle. And that just, I think, explains his just devotion to the craft of just doing it, because most people wouldn't have noticed it if he had not focused on that for 3 months, but he just did it for the sake of it.
Exactly. Yep. That's such a great point. Yep.
And then something I like about Carl Jung, from my understanding of him, is that a lot of bad things will happen when you try to ignore or suppress your shadow and don't integrate it with your entire life. And then that's usually when the shadow becomes a real issue and can cause pain for yourself and other people, rather than integrating it and trying and not pretending like it's not there.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly it, right? I mean, and again, one of his really famous quotes is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And I think that a lot of people get confused on what the shadow is or what shadow work is, right? And I think the term has been hijacked a little bit by pop therapy and by woo woo, new age, spiritualism, etc. But in the traditional sense, you can't speak on the shadow if you don't also speak on the persona, right? And so persona is I think is the Greek word for mask, or it comes from the Greek word for mask. And so persona and shadow are two sides of the same coin. And what our persona is, I mean, right, it's our presentation to the world, but beyond that, it's how we seek to be perceived by those around us. And our persona is in direct it's a compensatory function. It's a compensation to our shadow, right?
Mm.
So in whatever qualities we want to have acknowledged in us, or being seen as possessing, or try and sort of cultivate in that persona, etc., it's opposite. The inverse of that is our shadow, and is also as equally as true. And so what happens, again, if these are two sides of a spectrum, and they're compensatory functions, what we want to do is shorten the gap between the two of them, right? So if we're always nice and affable and kind, secretly we are angry, mean, bitter, and resentful, right?
Yeah.
But it's not about removing one or the other. It's about simply shortening the gap between the two, because then there's less compensation energy. It's not as compensatory in the function of it. You're able to sort of hold the both. And so that is the shadow in the traditional sense. And one of the key sort of mechanisms to identify is through this process of projection. And projection is the externalization of a non-integrated aspect of ourselves. Projection is the mechanism that occurs within the persona and the shadow. It's like the through line that takes it. So these parts of ourselves that we haven't yet fully accepted, acknowledged, become conscious of, we externalize those onto an outside figure or thing. This very often shows up the most in romantic relationships. And yeah, so again, the process of becoming aware of that, building consciousness around that, really is the first step there.
Yeah. Would you say that when you shorten the gap between those two things, the result is more authenticity?
I would say that. More
Okay.
authenticity. Yep. That's obviously just the perfect way to put it. More energy, I think. And I also think there's more magnetism as well in who you are and in that authenticity.
Yeah.
But that's totally it, right? And it's the difference between, again, I use sort of like the niceness as an example. That's the difference between being a nice guy and a good man.
I like that distinction. It sort of reminds me of, another thing I think that comes along with being more authentic is that you're more truthful, so you tell the truth because you're no longer sort of putting on a persona and not being yourself. And I think I heard this from Jordan Peterson, is that when you sort of have that persona and you're not telling the truth, so the life you create isn't yours because it was this persona that created it rather than the truth that you had.
That's such a beautiful way of looking at it. Yeah. It just ends up being a house of cards, right? And also people recognize that. They may not consciously be aware of it, but our nervous systems register it. Like our mammalian brain, right? So our prefrontal cortex is built on top of our lizard brain and our mammalian brain. It really works in this tertiary process, to be reductive with it. And so our subconscious, our mammalian brain, our nervous system is designed to register and detect any lack of congruence in what people,
because it's dangerous, right?
it's dangerous. It's survival, exactly. So, yep, that's something that that we have to give credence to in this process for sure.
Yeah. I have sort of a simple but also difficult question. You sort of covered it with the 4 archetypes, but what would you say is masculinity?
Um, I think masculinity is is generative in the sense that it generates for others care, love, opportunity, safety, protection, containment. But I think it's there. I think it's trans. I think there's a transmutable aspect of it too, right? I think that masculinity is transmuting energy, love, energy that's available here, love, into an output that intentionally generates for those beyond self.
So self-transcendence from sort of Maslow's hierarchy would be ultimate masculinity.
I think so. Yeah, but I also think again, so much of these questions in this work is about being able to hold, and so much of mental health, and this is what the research indicates too, is being able to hold two conflicting ideas at once, right? All of these things, the answer to a lot of these questions is some type of paradox.
Yeah.
Um, because I do believe that there is a primal aspect to it. And I think that this is that wild man that we're talking about, right? And this is why men do so well and love and feel this masculine fire in sport and in business. There's this competitive edge. There's this real deep desire. Yeah, I mean, masculine energy is half of the world. The other half is obviously, the yin energy. And generally speaking, or to be kind of reductive with it, the masculine energy is outward energy, doing, achieving, conquering, giving, penetrating. And feminine energy is more of an inward energy, reception, letting go, flow, receiving, allowing, surrender.
Mm.
So the masculine energy creates the container, holds containment and boundary for the feminine energy to flow. And the container is actually liberating, right? So if I said to you, I want you to write me a movie about a broken-hearted cowboy who's able to find who realizes that the love wasn't for him actually, right? So I've given you limitations, containers to what I want you to create. And then if I just said, I want you to write me a movie, which one
Yeah.
seems easier?
Yeah.
Right?
It reminds me of this idea. Yeah. That more people, you're like the idea that if you'll be happier and more free if you have more choices, but you'll just keep thinking about what if I did this, and when you pick one of them, and then feel
That's
regret.
it.
Yeah.
Yep. The choice paradox. Exactly. So it's about marrying these principles, right? We need the limitations, but within the limitation is how we actually find freedom.
Yeah. I love the way you put that. What advice would you give to your younger self or to young men today about how to live a good life?
Well, for myself, I would tell myself to stop being so goddamn hard on myself. That would be the one thing that I would say. Ultimately, I think that you don't have control over, you don't have as much control over the direction of your life as you think you do. And the best things in life are hard to plan or account for. So you can relax and take it easy and trust that deep within you lies the spark of the infinite. I call it the restless whisper, right? And this is the hero's journey thing. There is a deep beckoning, a deep calling within your inner experience and within your psyche that wants to unfold and blossom like a flower. and it will on its own accord if you allow it. And so the process of getting out of your own way
Mm.
is underrated. And now that doesn't mean that you don't show up with the best preparation, the best attitude possible, the best intention. But beyond that, it's got nothing to do with you.
Yeah, there's something higher guiding you.
There's something higher, yeah, guiding you. And, I don't even like the word guided. There's something higher that wants to come through you,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
in you.
In you.
Yeah.
And I think that in this culture, we just, especially young men, we fall into this trap of hustle and productivity and of needing things to go a certain way, to look a certain way because of social media, XYZ. And now not all of that is bad, right? But life has a way, clarity has a way. There's a certain pace to your own inner experience, to the unconscious, to your own individuation process that you can't plan for. You cannot plan for it. And the more you try to, and the more you try and the tighter you hold on, it's really just control. It's really just fear disguised as something else.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you have to integrate the feminine of, because I think it's more masculine to sort of the achievement, but also needing to be in control is I think maybe more masculine, and then saying like, and on a more macro level, like things will work itself out if I do the things on the daily level. That there's some, like if I follow my authentic passion, that this will work out, and that also is sort of scary to think that there's something else here that's gonna figure it out and you're not in control.
Yep. And yeah, there's something else here. And that's again in take with what I say with a grain of salt, right? I'm, filter it through my own experience, my own worldview, etc. But as a Jungian, as somebody who's falls in the lineage of Carl Jung a lot, right? Like when you were talking about there's something else here, right? You're not alone, like in your own head. There are
Yeah.
things beyond your ego, whether it's just in the unconscious, the collective unconscious, or we could get more spiritual, etc. There are things that are bigger than you that are operating within you. And
Yeah.
that's scary. That's challenging.
Mm. Yeah. And because that's operating in everyone, then it's operating in the world at some level.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. So interconnected.
Um, Moving over to somatic psychology, do you think you can sort of explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, somatic work it's a holistic approach to wellness, to mental health, really, to well-being that is inclusive of the mind, body, spirit connection. So it has this base understanding that a lot of our orientation, our experience on the planet, our emotions, our memories, our traumas manifest and live in the body, right? I mean, we've heard the phrase psychosomatic, right? People can manifest,
Hmm.
or, we know the placebo effect, the nocebo
Yeah.
effect. There are these really deep, deep manifestations of this that occur in the body. So somatic work, somatic psychology it's both like a theology, or a philosophy, and a very practical set of body oriented tools that really utilize the body as the mechanism to achieve greater well-being, mental health, um, satisfaction, as opposed to just our thinking or attacking the mind. And again, it's sort of inclusive of how the brain developed, right? Again, if the prefrontal cortex, the neocortex, is built off the mammalian brain, which is where sort of our nervous system orientation sits
Hmm.
more in our social belonging, adaptability. that's really inclusive of that, because in my experience, that people very often, in working as a therapist, etc., in their own mental health, anxiety, depression, people very often are having an experience in their body, and then a lot of the thinking, the thoughts attached, are used to justify that experience.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Are there certain like ancient practices that, I mean, I would be surprised if there wasn't, that incorporated somatic psychology? The one that comes to mind to me is qigong. When I think of that, think of somatic psychology using the body as a way to sort of, because the I don't know how to put it that well, but the body, that using the body's influence to calm the mind because it's so important.
Abs- Absolutely, right? And that's, the way I like to put it is that the mind is a wild horse. The body is what tames it. The body is what breaks it, right? And so there's a meditative practice as well. I think it's Vedic. I'm not sure, but basically, and again, this is kind of yoga nidra too, as well,
Mm.
right? So our thinking, our minds can be very sporadic, right? But the body is actually a container to harness our focus. So if I were to say to you, right, close your eyes and put your attention on your left collarbone, suddenly your point of focus, your mind, is contained in the body. And then I would say, put it on your left elbow, right hip, right shoulder. Your point of focus is being contained in the physical body.
Mm.
And there's a lot of different practices, right? I mean, you look at sort of like chanting as such a popular thing, right? That activates the vagus nerve, which exists in, I mean, it goes from the back of the brain all the way down the spinal cord, but it runs through the back of the throat. And that vagus nerve is what activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the aspect of our nervous system responsible for deep rest and healthy digestion. Um, I mean, dance and movement, right? There's some aspects of trance within some of that. This sort of self hypnosis, um, shaking, somatic shaking. I mean, you see animals, they have a shaking and tremor mechanism that takes place. All mammals do this, that shakes off old static energy and resets their nervous system, which is
Mm.
something that we do. The human body is able to do that, right? The human body is able to autonomously move and reset the nervous system on its own. There's a set of practices, um, which is I teach that in my work, in my course. I have some somatic workshops and stuff. That's the process that I teach. But I remember it being really jolting for me the first time that my body started moving on its own. Right. I mean, we've all had an experience where like our muscles twitch a little bit, right? After
Yeah.
a workout, whatever. But way beyond that, I mean, big movement patterns, shaking, some convulsing, um, entirely beyond conscious control, right? Now I can stop the process at any time if I want to. So it takes enough surrender and letting go. But the body will go through this innate process if you allow it to.
Um, do you think that these somatic techniques has some sort of influence on your chakras throughout the body?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
This bioenergetic sort of Alexander Lowen's work. I've noticed that in a lot of the somatic work that I do, there are certain things that the body innately wants to do, sort of for it on its own, right? It's kind of direction that it wants to move. And one of them is like deep opening of the pelvic floor in some big ways, sort of like our root chakra, how we stay rooted. And also like decompression of the rib cage and opening and strengthening of the diaphragm. The body is craving that. And so many of us, right, we sit, we're hunched, we're closed in. We kind of live in defensive postures. If you see a mammal that's afraid, right, their shoulders are rounded over. We sit like this all day. We're typing. That's a defensive posture for the body. And the body wants to open up into more expansion, decompress the ribs, and really open up that diaphragm. And again, this is all in alignment with the chakras and the spine.
Yeah, you can definitely notice a difference when you put your body in different positions. Just hunching over almost puts you in that more sympathetic state where like you're ready to go into it to prepare for something, and then opening it up. Maybe it's because when you open yourself up, you feel that you're safe. So you're able to go into the parasympathetic.
That's exactly it. And the other big thing that I tell people to think of is pace. Even just simply how one walks through the city streets of Los Angeles, right? Because your body is, in so much of communication, is nonverbal, right? And if you're always in a rush and you're frantic and you're communicating to yourself, your own mammalian brain, your nervous system, you're just in fear. Where are you trying to get to? You know what I mean? Like being able to move your body with a certain pace, with a certain intentionality behind it, sends signals to yourself and to people around you that you're safe, right? You're grounded. There's a certain energy to it that is really compelling and really attractive.
Yeah, I definitely, you can tell the power of it simply by just focusing on your breath and your inhale and exhale, and you just feel a difference. It's crazy how it's crazy that we sort of overlook it, since for like a minute we don't breathe and then we die, but it's also crazy the power it has because it's something we do all the time.
100%.
Um, so what are some of the mindfulness and spiritual practices that you do on a daily basis, or maybe weekly, whatever it is?
Yeah. So I pray. I pray every day. Most of my prayers, like 95% of them, I'm just praying to get out of self. I think the root of all challenges, all sort of suffering, we think about ourselves too much, right? Self-pity, self-loathing, self-centeredness, selfishness. What's the key ingredient here? It's all self, right? And we live in a culture that it's self on steroids. And
Mm.
so a lot of my prayers are just, I ask, I very often use the word God. I ask God to just sort of direct my thinking, to give me inspired thought, to get out of self, to remove selfishness, self-pity, self-seeking. How can I transcend self and focus instead on how I can be useful and how I can show up and how I can recognize the interconnected aspect of life, and that my actions, my choices, my behaviors extend and impact the world and other people beyond self, right? So that's a lot of my prayer life. I used to be a huge journaler. I don't do it as much. I still have all of my old journals here. I got probably, I don't know, 30 up in my closet. But as I've been writing more online, I'm not journaling as much. My meditation practice has sort of gone in and out of my life as a key piece. I mean, years ago, I was a daily, twice a day practitioner. The last 6 weeks or so, I've been meditating a good, healthy amount, probably 5 to 6 days a week, just once a day. Honestly, my own therapy practice, I am a therapist. I have a private practice, and then I also work with a therapist as well, is super key. And I think of spirituality and mental health as kind of the same thing, to be honest. It's ultimately just your relationship to existing, right? Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
your relationship to life? Life with a capital L. How do you feel about the fact that you're on this planet?
Yeah.
That's really
Mm.
it, right?
Yeah. Um, why do you think that it seems that so many people are quote unquote lost in life, or not happy with what they're doing, or just very unsure of their path in their life?
Yeah, I think there's, a big question. I think that we do have a crisis in meaning,
Mm.
right? People don't have meaning. People can manage a good amount of difficulty and suffering and adversity if they have meaning behind it.
Yeah.
I think that we have lost tradition and ritual, right? In sort of religiosity, not that like has to exist solely within religious institution or that that's the answer or etc. But we have lost lineage of tradition attached to ritual. And I use the word ritual intentionally because ritual is how we find meaning. There is meaning embedded in ritual. There's inherent symbolic expression. Ritual is symbolic action, right? I think that, obviously, the tech age and the tech revolution has an impact there. Specifically in that it's made it more challenging for people to have self-directed thought. And this is why, right, like people online, Dan, whatever, talk about going on walks, right? Don't listen to music, don't bring a podcast, whatever, like journaling. You have to create a container, a bubble, like some distance from yourself and the world behind you, because there's so much stimulus and we're constantly bombarded with things that are trying to control and dictate how we think and feel. That's late stage capitalism. In the absence of self-directed thought, I think is a key piece of that. But then therefore that's also one of the first steps to solution and to find greater meaning as well.
Yeah. I think it seems to me that a mistake that people might make is pursuing happiness. I think that's a good thing to pursue, but I think when you pursue meaning, the byproduct of that is happiness.
So yeah, you were talking about pursuing meaning as opposed to pursuing happiness. That's such a wonderful way to put it, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't really think of that, though. I got that from my dad, who also, I guess, is sort of a therapist. He doesn't really call himself that, but he does a lot of that sort of work. So that's sort of why I can talk about this stuff and have an understanding, because I'll have conversations with him about this stuff.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that. Sounds like you have your pops is somebody you look up to a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next question is, if you could have an afternoon to talk to any 5 people in history, who would they be?
God damn, man. Winston Churchill and C.S. Lewis. Dude, you're gonna Jesus. Tom Hardy. And these are all men, man. That's bad. Okay. And yeah, I don't know, man. My head wants to say Mother Teresa, or my heart. That's a tough question, though. But yeah, those are some solid answers. I feel fine with those.
Yeah. I think it's sort of that paradox of choice. You have so many to pick from. If I had just given you 3 people to pick from, it probably would have been easier than everybody that ever existed in history.
Yeah, right. Tell me about it.
Regarding the future as a creator, what are your plans and next steps you're taking for, say, the next 1 to 2 years?
Yeah. Wow. My next step is sort of medium. I'm sort of shifting into more video. So I'm starting a podcast as well. Gonna be hopefully shooting that next week. My first episode with Dan Coe is gonna be my first guest.
That's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I'm stoked on that. And yeah, I'm wanting to sort of shift gears, into more video. So YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, I think, having the writing as a foundation is incredibly important in idea generation. But I think a huge aspect of where my skill set lies is in my ability to verbally articulate some complex ideas in a way that's super accessible. So that's the next big step for me. Yeah, I mean, I want to continue to build out and work on this course that I have a little bit, just to continue to add value and to harness it and make it, way more valuable for folks that are interested, and eventually double down on creating another, either like lower ticket product or another little course, something. I really want to get into the relationship space. So I want to, help men that struggle with codependency, and unhealthy relationships, lack of confidence and esteem in their ability to find a good partner, who maybe struggle on that addicted lover side of things, right? Where are using. I think men have a tendency to show up to women thinking that they're looking for love when in reality they're looking for justice. And it's some kind of sick justice in relation to their own internal wounding, right? And so this is where, in a simple way, that's just a fancy way of saying that I think, men compensate for their own struggles through women, with women. And I don't think it's fair to either parties. And so I want to help men overcome their inner wounding so that they can show up in excellence both for themselves and for their goal, if that is their goal, to find a healthy partner and relationship and one day have a family. So
Yeah, I love that. I think a couple things. I think definitely the relationship aspect is something that is so important in society. I think it, in a lot of cases, is the foundation of a good society is having good relationships and henceforth usually a good family unit, because that is the base of the youth and everything like that. Um, are there any specific creators or people in the YouTube space that like you would be in sort of their space or I guess niche?
yeah, it's a good question. I've never been a huge YouTube consumer until kind of recently, but there are a couple people that I think of. I like I think his name's Sho Nemoto. Do you know who he is?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I like his stuff a little bit. You know, Mark Manson. I think he's just he's got a very practical approaches to a lot of these bigger questions and life stuff, which is kind of how I think about things a little bit. Um, that's a good question. That's a good question. And in some ways, it's kind of been difficult for me to. I guess maybe the intention isn't to niche down, but I have such a wide range of experience and knowledge, right? There's like the traditional therapy stuff. So there are some creators, Nicole LaPera, the holistic psychologist. I don't know if you know her. She's huge, but in a lot of ways, I can kind of see myself as like the male version of Nicole LaPera. But beyond that, I also have this healthy dose of masculine sort of red pill, ideology as well too. And so being able to marry the two of those, I don't know, man. My hope, and there's a part of me that kind of believes I'm kind of in a lane of my own here.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way with trying to get my dad online. Is that he's in a unique. It's like the niche of one that Dan talks about, which is perfect, but I think it's also in the beginning can be difficult to get the
Yeah.
first eyes. But
What does your what
once
does your
you are
dad
big,
do?
um, I don't even really know how to explain what he does. I guess would be my best way to say it. But um, I guess you could say physical therapist, but not really in the traditional sense. A therapist sort of sounds similar to what you do, and also nutrition in some way. So basically, he's spent the last 25 years trying to figure out how to get his life in order and learning how to do that. So I guess that would
Yeah,
be
that's
the
beautiful.
different areas of life that come
Yep.
along with living a good life. Yeah.
Okay. Fuck yeah. Love it.
Yeah. Maybe he could go on your podcast. It seems like I'm going to send him this podcast. I think he'd like it. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Would you say that you have some sort of a long-term goal with being a creator?
I do. Yeah. I mean, such a big part of this is I mean, there's a real goal behind it, and the goal is centered around time, lifestyle, right? I want to be in a position where I can work, 2 to 4 hours a day and be able to
Walk all day.
afford the type of life that I want, right? And like, it's how you define financial freedom, right? Like, my goal is to be able to, do the things that I want to do with the people I want to do them with. It's not to make as much money as possible.
Yeah.
It's really sort of lifestyle and experience oriented more so than anything
I'd
else.
resonate with that.
But I want to, take the platform and, I envision myself doing some public speaking 100%, writing a book as well. I also see there's a lot of sort of career moves that can be made within the therapy sort of field as well with it. I'm a part of this I'm working with a team right now we're in the very early stages to develop a retreat center on some land in Taos, New Mexico. So a bunch of different sort of retreats that we would do there. But there's also the creative side too. I want to tell bigger human stories, and I have a couple finished movie scripts that are sort of floating around right now that are hoping to, to get some bigger attention there and, start a little production company. I've got some friends and some folks that are, really successful in that area. So
That's really
as
cool.
I said, he's just, kind of got some fingers in a couple different areas. Yeah.
Would you say there's any people that have sort of done what you would want to achieve in certain aspects of life? Like certain people that you look up to as sort of like a version of your ideal future? Maybe not exactly, but
Yeah, maybe not exactly. Um, I don't know if I have any specific names, but it is just sort of this constant sort of reinvent yourself kind of, but just based on whatever you're interested and curious about, philosophy, and not needing to sort of limit yourself to one sort of career path, one what do you do, who are you
yeah.
type of thing, but being able to expand beyond that, that's really the intention and the goal there.
Yeah. It's sort of being a modern Renaissance man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely.
Is there any certain like places in the world that you would want to have like home bases or like a visit?
Yeah, for sure. I see myself having some sort of a home base in Colorado, as well as probably here in Los Angeles. Again, there's this land that the hopes is that we're going to develop into this retreat center in Taos, which is just 4 hours south of Denver. My family lives in Denver. So that, I love it there. But then, wanting to sort of continue to have these connections to the movie business a little bit. And I've been in LA for 10 years, but I've been thinking a little bit more about heading back down to Central America. Maybe even building a little casita, getting some land in Guatemala or something like that, or even Colombia. And I've got a buddy in Guatemala that is building a huge retreat center down there, and he has a bunch of land and a bunch of little, plots of land for sale to build a little casita or something. So kind of saving up for that a little bit. Yeah.
That's really cool. I think South America and Central America is definitely some place that I want to visit. I feel like there's something very vibrant about the atmosphere there, especially the tropical.
Yeah, exactly.
As we come to the end of the podcast, if you could only have the audience have one takeaway after listening, what would it be?
I would say that you can cultivate meaning in your struggle and in your challenges. And the second you assign meaning to suffering, it becomes sacrifice. And that is how you build higher virtue, spiritual force, and greater resource that can fuel you in your future endeavors.
I love that. Thank you for coming on, Brian.
Yeah, Christian, thank you, brother. It was a pleasure.